Right, okay, so my approach tonight is to try and read the text through the eyes of the original writers and their readers and hearers. Okay, this is the approach I'm taking, is to try and understand what did they mean by the words that they used. Okay, so it's going to be treated as any other piece of ancient literature. The text is written by humans, written in a human language or languages, Hebrew, Greek, Aramaic. It's going to be using the cultural understanding of the images that they had, the ideas, their history, their theologies as they developed, and their worldviews. And it's going to treat the Bible as a library of books rather than just one book. This library has been collected together over 1400 years. I am not going to stick to one particular canon of scripture. There are at least 7 different ones, all having different combinations of books across the Christian Church Universal. I will also be dipping into other contemporaneous literature, including pseudepigraphal material, which is material that didn't quite make it into the cut, or the various cuts of the Bible, or only one canon might have it. So it's not going to be treated as a monolithic text which gives a single answer regarding the afterlife. It's going to take it as it is, an account of how the afterlife understandings developed as time progressed for that particular nation of the Hebrews, with all of their influences. So it's going to be trying to understand the other dimensions of reality for the original participants of the text, because I believe that that will unlock a coherent view of the paranormal elements that are within the text, and how they will actually interplay with today's paranormal events that we see online or experience ourselves. Now, the problem for many Christians, and I know that most people here won't be Christians, but you will have experienced this, I'm sure, when you've engaged with Christians regarding the subject of the paranormal. Most Christians have an absolutely rubbish understanding of the afterlife. It's just generally taken as, well, you die, you go up, or you go down, and that's it. So the concept of any afterlife is a bit of a problem for them, and even for Luther, who was a pretty clever guy, he struggled with the afterlife because he had to throw out indulgences at the time of the Reformation, and because of that, it required him to get rid of a lot more within the texts and reinterpret texts. So he kind of was one of the more modern people that got rid of a lot of the supernatural elements within the Bible itself, which is quite ironic, really, because he's quite held up by people who supposedly hold the Bible to a very high standard. There are many paranormal events that take place in the text. If you don't know, or even if you have a slight understanding of what's in the Bible, it's packed full of stuff. You've got precognition, you've got remote viewing with some classic sort of psychic spy stuff going on. You've got astral travel, you've got journeying through the heavenly realms, you've got telekinesis, you've got the potential for the understanding of crisis apparitions, you've got levitation, you have some mythic beasts like Behemoth and Leviathan, which are part of what's called the Chaos Camp, the chaos, the waters of the chaos and that sort of thing, the battle between chaos and order. You've also got out-of-body experiences. So the temptation of Jesus is an out-of-body experience that takes place for those that know it. We've got people that go up into the heavens. Paul goes to paradise. You've got Ezekiel being lifted up by the hair and taken to places. You've got teleportation. Hyperspace travel is what we would call it today. The Jewish idea of kefizat haderach is in the Bible. If you're a Dune fan, you'll know what that means, because they ripped it off. You've also got healing. That is a paranormal event. You've got necromancy with the ghost mistress of Endor. I'm not going to call her the Witch of Endor because that is a hangover from King James days. The actual original is Ghost Mistress. If you've ever read, I think it's The First Ghosts by Irving Finkel, which came out last year. Brilliant book. Adds a bit of a chapter on that as well. You've got some portals to the other worlds. You've got Endor. You've got the gates of Hades at Caesarea Philippi. You've got the transfiguration of Jesus where Moses and Elijah, long dead, have appeared. You've got Gehazi, who is Elisha's servant, who can't see the heavenly realms around him. So Elisha says, "Open his eyes, Lord," and suddenly, bump, he can see into the spirit realm. You've got lots of meetings with spirit beings, the angels, you've got the diamonds, possessions, you've got archeons, you've got princes, gods of the nations, that sort of thing. And wackiest of all, you've got sexual interaction with spirit beings, watchers. So it's not just your Daily Mirror or Daily Star type newspaper story. You've got that stuff strange happening now in the actual text. So remember again, we're going to try and read the text through the eyes of the original writers and see what they were trying to see and convey. So to understand the text, you have to know when they're written. They weren't all written by one person who decided to go on a mushroom trip and write everything down, what he saw. You've got to know what the context was, what was going on, the history, the wars, the different nations that were surrounding, the ideas that were uppermost in the mind of the readers and the writers, when they mentioned certain key words and phrases. So, when we talk about the Bible, written predominantly by Hebrews, I think there's one chapter written by Nebuchadnezzar, the Babylonian. You've got Egyptian influence, you've got Canaanite influence, Mesopotamian, Hittite, Hellenistic, Roman, all of these cultures that span that vast period of time. The Hebrews were not this island culture separated from outside influences, and this is the thing that a lot of people who take the Bible seriously, if you take it at an academic level, you will know this, but if you take it from just the person sitting in the pew of a church, you won't necessarily be told this. The worldview that they had was not one of modern materialism. So we can't really use our own eyes that are enlightenment driven, rationalistic based, materialistic, to actually interpret the text and get to what they were trying to convey at the time. And it also is very animistic. You've got spirits, humans and non-humans existing. They interact with each other. So, this is a text that is rich with lots of cultural influence. And we need to take it as it is, that academic text, for what we're going to be looking at tonight. So let's have a look at what the Hebrews actually believed. So the original idea of the flat earth, yes, it's in the Bible. What you have to realize is that the Bible is written from the perspective of anywhere from 2nd to 1st millennium BCE person who hadn't got access to GPS satellites. As a result of that, the world that they understood was what they could see from horizon to horizon, and maybe a bit beyond if they went traveling. You could see above, you could see the clouds, you could see the moon, the sun, the stars, and below you had this idea of the underworld, Sheol, otherwise called the deep, the abyss, that sort of the darker regions. And if you look in the actual diagram there, you'll see that there are tubes going up to the earth. Those are actually interesting because they are portals. They believed that valleys, caves, were portals to the underworld. When you dug a grave and you put somebody in it, they were under the earth and they were going to Sheol. It was the body would go there but what was immaterial would go down into the underworld of Sheol.
Matthew,
So
I'm so sorry to interrupt you. I don't think we're actually seeing your slides. Are you screen sharing?
I am screen sharing. Okay, let me have a little go again.
Sorry, this is not my forte either,
No,
but
no.
yeah,
Let me have a look.
just been a few
Screen
comments.
share.
See them.
Try that one. Share that. Is that working?
It looks like it's about to. Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you so much.
So which one are you seeing? The model of the cosmos?
The model of the cosmos, yeah.
Fantastic. Okay.
Thank
Sorry,
you.
I apologize. I'll leave that up there a bit longer while I talk about it then. So you've got your flat Earth. You've got Underworld, the chthonic fortress of the dead, Sheol. You've got the great deep underneath that. That is what the Earth was raised out of in the creation story. And then you've got the waters above the firmament and the heaven of heavens. You've got God up there. There's no single development of understanding of the afterlife at all. So you've got lots of ideas of people in different places all coming up with these concepts. And they kind of converge and then they go away and then they reconverge and develop as other things interact, other cultures interact. So there is an overall trajectory of the afterlife. It might go 2 steps forward and 1 step back in sometimes, but it will have a forward trajectory as you go through the different texts in a chronological order, which does not mean you go through in the order Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, Joshua, Judges, etc. You have to go and find out when each book was written, because they're not necessarily in this chronological order for your average Bible, which is always helpful. Okay, so Sheol, then, the chthonic fortress of the dead, referred to in the texts as the land of dust. Dust you are, and to dust you will return. Those famous funeral words. The land of no return, because you go there, you don't come back, which is strange because actually you do. And this is a similar phrase that's used in Mesopotamian texts as well, where they talk about the land of no return for the underworld. And then if you read Finkel's work, you will see that there's a lot of spells and necromantic activities in order to make sure that those things that come back go back. It's also part of a continuum from the life to physical death. In the old ancient Near East, when you breathed your last breath, you were on a journey, but it wasn't necessarily the point of death, physical death. There was a lot of stuff that was going on, including the belief amongst certain Jews that the spirit hovered above the body for up to 3 days before it went into the afterlife. But the understanding is that everybody goes to Sheol at physical death. Your body goes into the grave, your soul stroke spirit, there's a lot of interplay between the two. The immaterial part of you goes to Sheol. And it was under the earth, it was a place of shade. The Bible talks about shades, the Rephaim, spirits of the dead. They were the noble dead. They were gathered, you know, in the very early Hebraic ideas, you were gathered to your ancestors. And there was no knowledge of life on top of earth because you were down in Sheol. You didn't really know what was going on above. Some spirits were allowed to come up. That's what was the cultural belief. Some spirits were able to get preternatural knowledge of things that were happening. Some were able to tell knowledge that was of the future events. And it was that was frowned upon in the texts because they can play around with people's minds if you know what's going to happen. God was not present there. This is an accepted thing that God was not present in the underworld because God lives in heaven above. And life was muted. It was very dull, grey. It wasn't like the Egyptian afterlife, which was very rich and vibrant. The Mesopotamian influences that came into the early Hebraic ideas actually were quite negative towards the afterlife. And you weren't to consult the dead because God wasn't there. They don't know anything, so don't bother with that sort of thing. That was the general gist. Then you get into later Hebraic ideas, so around about the First Temple period, where Sheol develops into a place of national gathering for Hebrews. Okay, so the Hebrews would go there, other nations would go there, but they would be segregated out, as it were. Not too much segregation. But everybody goes there. The nobilities of the clans, of the countries, of the nations, they were the Rephaim, the noble dead. And change takes place, which means that God kind of now is understood to be in Sheol as well, because the Hebrews are worshipping God, and so therefore God will be with them in Sheol. So not just in national places like the temple or on Mount Sinai, but actually down in the depths of the earth, in the Sheol. There was still some reaction in some quarters against a conscious afterlife. So you've got your writer of Ecclesiastes saying, oh, the dead know nothing. There was a lot of polemic going on against Canaanites' necromantic practice at that time as well. So, they were trying to say, focus on Yahweh. Yahweh will tell you what's going to happen. You don't need to go to any necromancers. Then a catastrophe happens in 586 BCE, where the first temple's destroyed. Now, there's a problem because God was believed to be in the temple, and it's been destroyed. So where the heck is God now? Well, the idea was that God now moved back up to the heavens and only dropped down to descend and protect Hebrews in times of trouble, and also to give them some punishments if they were naughty as a nation. And then you get to the intertestamental period between the writing of about 420 BCE, which are the last books of the Old Testament, up until you're starting to get to the life of Jesus sort of recorded type stuff. In that time, it's amazing because you've had the nobility and the intelligentsia of the Jews, the Hebrews, taken to Babylon. Those that sort of know about the Babylonian exile, maybe even from Boney M's Rivers of Babylon song, it's not everybody from Jerusalem that was taken to Babylon. It was only the clever people, only the nobility, because the way the Babylonians worked is that they influenced the culture, the rollers and the shakers, so that when they went back, they would take the teachings to that culture that they were part of originally. And also you've got Alexander the Great and Hellenism also coming through into the ancient Near East region where the Israelites were. And that's where you get a real flourishing of angel and demonology. All sorts of things, ideas about angels, ideas about demons, different classes of different beings, all sorts of stuff. So you get a great diversification in the spiritual realms as well. So you've got multiple heavens. And the Jews, we can't say what a Jew believed because there were lots of different groups of Jews. But what we can say is that there were anywhere between 365 heavens. We know from the biblical text that there was a third heaven that was called Paradise, or Abraham's bosom. The highest heaven, which is spoken of when the angels appear to the shepherds in the Christmas story, glory to God in the highest heaven. That was understood as God's throne room. You had the heaven of the luminaries, where the sun, moon, and stars were. And you had travel to these different places, which was possible by these very holy people. Enoch, the understudies of the Book of Enoch, the ones that compiled it, they have Enoch traveling all over the world, as was known. And overlaid on top of that are places like the original Garden of Eden, the north, where there's different gates in the heavens that let the rain, and you've even got in Enoch things like a prototype style Stonehenge, which is really weird. It describes how to the windows of the heavens, and it does look like it's a Stonehenge type thing. But these are all kind of interplayed, so it is kind of like a Stranger Things type situation where not necessarily a negative upside down, but an alternative upside down. You've got Elijah and Jesus and Paul. These all go to different places as well in the heavenly regions. You've also got this idea that comes from the Greek, the place called Tartarus, which was where the Titans were locked up, or some of them, I think, which was classed as the prison of the fallen angels, otherwise known as the Watchers. For those that want to study the Watchers, the Book of Enoch, chapters 1 to 36, also known as the Book of the Watchers, is brilliant. So First Enoch, chapters 1 to 36, is absolutely amazing on this. Then you've got another place called Gehenna, which was understood at the time to be the valley of Ben Hinnom, which is just outside Jerusalem. Now, you will get a lot of people who will say, oh, yes, that's the place of everlasting burning. It was a rubbish dump where the worm never died. Archaeology disproves that idea, and that can only be traced back to something like a 14th century rabbi that came up with the idea of Ben Hinnom and Gehenna being a rubbish dump. It was a place where human sacrifice did take place because it was a valley, and there was a Topheth there, which is a sacrificial place for humans. It appears in the time of Isaiah and I think Jeremiah as well. They both condemn this. And the reason why it was done there is, again, because of these portals to the underworld, the caves and valleys. When you get to the New Testament, it becomes a lake of fiery destruction of the wicked. And then you start to get a retrofitting of ideas into older texts. So you've got this weird information in Genesis 6, which talks about the sons of God marrying the daughters of men. And they're like, what on earth is going on here? So there is some attempt to explain what's happening when you get to books like 1 Enoch, where you've got these watchers, which are the heavenly beings that were assigned over people to teach agriculture, to teach medicine, to teach metallurgy. They pervert their ways and teach all sorts of ways of using that against life, against the creation. So these are the fallen beings from the divine council, which is what CJ talked about from Psalm 82. And they mated with human women, and they create these things called the giants, otherwise known as, and this is an academic paper, the bastard sons of God. They are ravaging the landscape. They consume all the resources, and then they start to consume man and beast, and they unleash chaos into the world at that time. So this is where the idea of evil spirits actually comes from. The actual killing of these giants by the Noahic flood causes their bodies to release the evil spirits. And these are the ones, I think you get to the Book of Jubilees, and Mastama, which is the Satan character in there, comes along and manages to bargain with God to keep at least 10% on top of the surface of the earth to be able to plague humankind. Yeah. Try explaining that with your evangelical pastor. Ain't gonna work. And you start to get your angelology influenced by Babylonians. So the thing's called the cherubim. Now, this is really weird because you've got this meme at the moment going around about biblically accurate angels, which is total tosh. they're not biblically accurate angels at all, and I'll explain why in a bit. The cherubim are chimeral throne guardians of Yahweh, and they are based on the Babylonian Lamassu, which is the top picture here. These would be the throne guardians at the entrance to the temples. And they also cognate with the Egyptian-influenced seraphim, which were serpentine-style throne guardians as well. And you get the Ophanim, which is the wheels within wheels, the throne bearers of Yahweh. That's the bottom picture there. Some people think that Ezekiel was seeing UFOs. No, this is actually what they were looking at. So, ancient aliens, I'm sorry, you're wrong, just from archaeology's point of view. The Ophanim, they were the wheels within the wheels that were the carrying and lifting Yahweh's throne forwards and backwards, left and right, across the world, so that God could see what was happening. The idea of omnipresence with God at that time isn't really part of the scene. So the angelology is influenced by the Babylonians. Before I go on, I said that angels... No, I'll come on to that later. You get a diversification of Sheol during the intertestamental period as well. 1 Enoch 22 is really good. It gives you an idea of some of the ideas that the Pharisees had, where you've got the mountain of the dead, and inside that mountain are various compartments. You've got the righteous dead, which is paradise. It has a bright white fountain sparkling. Remember that this is a desert type scenario, so water, precious commodity, equals life. And so therefore the symbolism of the fountain of water in paradise there signified that this is a place of luxury. It's an oasis. It's a place of rest from the hardship and toils of life. But it isn't a place of just sitting around doing nothing, or even just being asleep. You've also got the dead who died prematurely in battle or from illness, so they're treated differently as well. Those who died without being judged in this life, so those who were quite bad towards people, maybe inadvertently, and they didn't get judged for their behaviours, they would be in another compartment. And those who were deliberately wicked, nasty, nasty people, they went into another compartment as well. So you've got this segregation going on. And this is often because of things that are coming in, like the Maccabean influence, the Jewish zealot type stuff, where they've been oppressed by the Greeks coming in. And, you know, why should these ungodly heathens end up in the same place as us Jews? You know, we're holy, we're God's people, we're Yahweh's people. And so this idea of segregation had to come in because of that. Then you get the Septuagint, which is about 300 BC. Now, the Septuagint is the Greek translation of the Hebrew texts. It was made by Alexandrian Jews, so they had a Hebrew Old Testament, as it were, in their own language. When they were doing the translation, they needed a place that was Sheol, but in the language of Greek, and so they chose Hades. So that idea of Hades, the Greek ideas of Hades, come into sort of the New Testament via the Septuagint, and because also Jerusalem at that time was Greco-Roman in pretty much its culture, with Judeo-Greco-Roman. You've got angels and demons. So where did the term angel come from? We'll come on to that later. That's what I was just wondering if I'd put that bit in or not. And then you've got much flexibility in the afterlife. So there's still this maintaining of the idea that everybody goes to Hades upon the physical death. But there's an initial judgment this time. So you might have heard of a final judgment that is bandied around as in the end of the age. You know, it's to come, the final judgment. Dogs and cats living together, that sort of thing. Sorry, I do like Ghostbusters. You've got an initial judgment being made to determine your starting point in the afterlife. Now that's interesting because progression in the afterlife is part of the Judaic understanding around about the 1st century. You've got an initial judgment being made, the books of deeds, so angels, heavenly beings, keeping accounts of what humans have been doing. So you've got your own, this is your life type scenario. The Red Book, Eamon Andrews is not an angel. You've also got the Book of the Living, which was used in judgment as well. So if you were in the Book of Deeds and judged, very good, you probably would also be in the Book of the Living and would not stay in Hades, but be carried across the chasm by the angels. You even have the angelic ferryman. So Charon, I think it is, the ferryman, is replaced by an angel and goes across the River Acheron. So this whole concept of water and a boundary to the afterlife is in that 1st century. And you've even got this weird thing called posthumous baptism, where Adam is baptized in the Etruscan lake, the underworld lake of Hades, in Hades. And that's in the life of Adam and Eve, Adam and Eve, and it's otherwise known as the Apocalypse of Moses. You've got places of torment. So if you've been bad, you will be punished. And also places of regret for things that have been done in this life that have been wrong towards others. And strangely, New Testament 1st century ideas, posthumous salvation was a possibility. So prayers for the dead were part of the early Christian understanding and practice. We even say rest in peace now, which is a very simple prayer for the dead. You've got this idea now of linking it with near-death experience reports. Well, you get this initial life review, which seems to come back and be a feature of a lot of these things, including self-evaluation, where you see things from the perspective of others and how you treated others. So that looks like an initial judgment. And you've got a boundary over which, once you go over, you won't come back. That's what they're told, They know intimately, intuitively, if I cross over this boundary, if I go through this gate or through this door or whatever, I will not come back to the land of the living. There's a bright light and a feeling of being loved because it's in the presence of God. That's what they would have had in the 1st century. You've got communication with deceased loved ones. That also features as part of Perpetua, one of the works with Perpetua, who prays for somebody who appears in a dream to her mistress, and her mistress asks Perpetua to pray for her. She does, and then the apparition appears again in the dream, and it's changed. You've got communication with a God being. You've got veridical out-of-body experiences as well. So OBEs, which are in the Bible, are also part of the near-death experience. And you've got all of this suggesting that there are parallel realms and states of existence, which kind of overlay on top of this plane of existence. As I say, Stranger Things is a really good metaphor or analogue for this in a negative way, but then you would have other layers of existence and states within the same geographical region. So afterlife, state more than place, seems to be a thing as you develop through Christianity to the present. Then you've got the Septuagint translators who had a problem with the Hebrew text and the popular culture. Daimon was an intermediary between the gods and humans, or at least it included intermediaries between gods and humans. But if you're a Septuagint translator and you're trying to say, oh, a being from Yahweh, sent by Yahweh to deliver a message to a human, if you use the word daimon, you're going to have a problem with your messaging because it they may get confused and think that it is a different being or it's from a different god. So they had to invent a new term. They wanted to distance other gods and Yahweh. So they created this term, or they used a term called angelos or angel, which just means messenger. Okay. Now this is where we flip back to the whole biblically accurate angels rubbish meme that's going around. Because an angel isn't an ontological classification of spirit being. You do not get a being that is an angel, just an angel. Okay, it's a role description. So you can have different kinds of spirit beings that are messengers from Yahweh, and they will be called angels. It's a bit like a postman or postwoman. They're not a class of human, it's just their job description. They are human, but they have a job that is delivering the mail. In the same way, you have different classes of beings, but they are all spirits. However, some of them might have a job that is delivering a message. Some of them will have a job that is upholding Yahweh's throne or being a guardian in the throne room of Yahweh. So angel just means messenger, okay? And in the Bible, in the New Testament, Paul is himself considered an angel by some of the people that he visits, because he is just somebody who's delivering a message from Yahweh, from God. So that brings us on to daimones, or demons. Now, they aren't what we understand them today. You know, they aren't Buffy the Vampire Slayer style horned creatures, medieval style sort of toasting forks, or anything from the early 1900s magicians posters, little red things sitting on your shoulder. We've got to kind of put aside that modern understanding of demons, and we've got to try and pick it up from the first century understanding. What did they mean when they used the word daimones in the text? And there were three classes of demons within the Greco-influenced cultures. There were the gods of the nations. That was mainly the philosophers that dealt with that sort of stuff. The intermediary beings that were not from Yahweh, they were also mainly dealt with by philosophers. They spoke on these things. But the popular culture understood daimones as being a deceased human spirit. Phantasms, ghosts. But you will not get that into modern understanding by Christianity, because about 200 AD, things changed. Tertullian decided that we're not going to have deceased human spirits being daimones. We're actually going to call them non-human spirits. So demons became only non-human spirits, which kind of left a gaping hole. Where do deceased human spirits fit? You know, we've had 200 years of Christianity where we've had deceased human spirits being daimones. How do we deal with this? And I don't think the church has actually dealt pretty much with it properly. Maybe the Church's Fellowship for Psychical and Spiritual Studies do, and you know, scholars might do that, but your general church-going person isn't going to understand that at all. Evil spirits and unclean spirits. So, unclean spirits in Greek is pneuma akatharton, and the unclean bit comes from, it's a ritual term that's associated with the dead. So when you see the term unclean spirits in the New Testament, you can know that pretty sure that that is the spirit of the dead. Evil spirits, they are a different Greek term, pneuma panera. They're understood predominantly as non-human spirits or very wicked human spirits, ones that have kind of almost become so inhuman in their actions. Cast your mind back to the Enochian literature, which talks about the evil spirits as the ones that were released when the Noahic flood happened. You will see all sorts of strange interplay between these evil spirits throughout the text. And unclean spirits as well. There's an interplay there. So demons, they sought embodiment. Angels were able to manifest physically by themselves, but demons cannot. They seek embodiment. So they're a different class of beings. They caused illnesses, mental and physical. The ancient Near East cultures blamed demons for many illnesses. If you're interested, Finkel, Irving Finkel again, is great on the Mesopotamian side. For the Egyptian side, you want somebody like Rita Lucarelli. She has written quite a bit on Egyptian demons as well. And exorcism was practiced amongst the ancient Near East cultures, whatever culture it was. These things got in, they infested, they caused illness, mental health problems. They were not welcome, and so there were techniques to cast them out. So to the New Testament writers, disciples, demons and ghosts were real, and they were understood as spirits of the dead. That's how you've got to read the New Testament. That's how you need to see it through the original writers and the readers and listeners. You've got the word phantasma, where we get phantasm. That's the Greek word for ghost. Jesus walks on the water. His disciples think he's a ghost. Bit of a crazy thing, because in their culture, ghosts couldn't walk on water. Only divine beings could walk on water. So the messaging there is, disciples, you are stupid because you're going against your own culture, and rather than accept Jesus as a divine being, you're willing to accept an absurdity that he is a ghost that can walk on water. You've also got his resurrection appearance of Jesus in the locked room. He says, I'm not a ghost, touch me. Ghosts don't have bones, they don't have flesh. Now, both times here, Jesus could have dismissed this idea that ghosts aren't real, but he doesn't. So the silence there is deafening. He could have very easily, for 2,000 years of Christianity, has said, ghosts are not real, and put it in writing, but he doesn't. Either that was a missed opportunity massively, or there's a reason why he didn't actually dismiss ghosts, because they're a reality. So in the Old Testament, there are ghosts, and this is the really odd thing, because a lot of Christians will say, oh, you don't get ghosts in the Bible. And even if you do, Jesus was just sort of talking about ghosts and saying he's not one of them, and that's it. But actually, you will find the word ghost in certain translations, like the New Revised Standard Version, in certain places. But if you go back to the original Hebrew, you will find a few phrases. For instance, the ov. Ov. It's pronounced ov, not ob. Ov. And that's used in conjunction with Baalat Ov. Well, Baal means Lord. And for those that know the Old Testament, Baal was one of those beings, or lots of several beings, who were enemy gods of Yahweh. So Baal just means master. So when you're looking at the text for the ghost mistress of Endor in 1 Samuel 28, you will see that phrase, and it just means mistress of the Ov. And an Ov is an ancestral spirit. You have another term called Overim, which are the travelers. Now, they are ones that cross over. So it seems that they are another kind of human ancestor being, spirit, that can move backwards and forwards between the realms, even though it is the land of no return, supposedly, that they've gone to. You've also got the what was called a hapax legomenon, which is a word that is used only once in the entire Hebrew Bible. And when you get to the King James, it says, oh, they're charmers. And it's a best guess that translators to the King James did in order to try and make sense of this itim word. Since we've recovered the Ugaritic texts, tablets, we've been able to see the Akkadian etimu, or the Ugaritic etimu. That means ghost. a human spirit. So we can now, in the NRSV and a lot of modern translations that use contemporary surrounding material to try and get an insight into what words mean, we can say that that means ghost in that particular text. And Elohim as well. Elohim, if you talk to your average Christian and say the word Elohim, they will think of God Almighty. But the actual word Elohim just means it's spirit being. It just means spirit. It's cognate with spirit. There is an Elohim, which is sort of like the uncreated one, which Christians would call God. But you also have Elohim, which are heavenly spirits, underworld spirits, including spirits of the dead, because when you read the original text for 1 Samuel 28, the ghost mistress of Endor, it says, the mistress sees an Elohim rising from the ground, i.e., I see a ghost rising from the ground. So those that say there are no ghosts in the Bible really don't know the Bible very well, even though they will protest to the highest heaven that they do. They don't. So this is just a very quick overview of some of the spirits that are in there. You have the Shadim, which are the class 1 gods. This classification, by the way, is by a guy called John Walton, and he's done a lot of work on ghosts, spirits of the demons, the spiritual beings within the Bible. So Shadim were the gods of the nations, that's Hebrew. Then you've got the Mazmer, which are the bastards. Those are the evil spirits, the non-human evil spirits. Lilith, which later on Jewish rabbis and so on turn it into Lilith, and then you get that retrojection of the idea of Lilith as the first wife of Adam rather than Eve. You've got the inhabitants, which is a really weird one. They inhabit desolate places, cities, houses that have been laid waste, emptied, deserted. So, hauntings. And then you've got goat demons, which, Mr. Tumnus style stuff, the Sherim. So those are intermediary non-human spirits. And then you get this plethora of human spirits that are in there. The Metim, who are the dead. If you know Meta in Hebrew means dead, which is quite ironic when you've got Facebook becoming owned by Meta as a company. It's quite interesting, quite ironic. You've got the unquiet dead, the Yatim, which we spoke about earlier, ghosts. You've got travelers, the Ov or the Overeem. You've got royal dead, which are the Rephaim, and you've got the knowing ones, which are the Yidoni. Now, the knowing ones seem to be the ones that are able to be atemporal spirits and know. They're not constrained to a timeline that we are. They're in another timeline that can access the future. Would be used by fortune teller type people. Right. So having gone through all of that and laid out the ground, I'm going to put just one idea out there. Reading a text that some people will already know about Legion. My name is Legion, for we are many, which is a demon-possessed man that Jesus encounters. We're going to try and see if I can build an argument that this is not non-human spirits predominantly occupying this man, but actually human spirits of the dead. So we're going to look at the Gergesene demoniac. Some people might call it the Gadarean demoniac. Basically, if you look in the orange bit, just to the 5 o'clock position of that blue piece called Sea of Galilee, you'll see Gadara there. Gadara and Gerasa, major towns of what was called the Decapolis. The Decapolis, the 10 towns, was a region that was owned by, at the time of the New Testament, the Romans, but had been Greco beforehand, Greco and Hasmonean. And you've got there Hippos, which is a major city. It's been excavated, I think, at the moment, or it has been for the last 10, 20 years, something like that. Just up from there, there's a place called Gergesa, which is where this story takes place. So if you want to, you can go on Google Maps and see Gergesa. If you look at the Dead Sea, you're going to want to type in El Kursi. This story couldn't be set in Gergesa, Gadara or Gerasa, simply because they're too far away. You've got a 5-mile distance to the sea where Gadara is, and then you've got a 37-mile distance for Gerasa, and you've got to contend with pigs charging 5 miles, 37 miles, crossing rivers to be able to go and drown themselves in Galilee. Doesn't make sense. So it's been Hellenistic. It's been Roman occupied since 64, 63 BCE. And Origen, who fairly early church father, says that the meaning of Gergesa is the dwelling of the casters out. So that town, Gergesa, on the left of the map there, is the most likely place where the story of Legion took place. You can see there it's got Kursi National Park in it at the moment. It was uncovered. There was a Byzantine monastery uncovered in the 70s. This is a 6th century monastery that was dedicated to the casting out of the demons into the pigs. And if you look at the bottom there, you can actually see there are some caves. And caves are part of the story where the demoniac lived in the caves. If you're wanting to look this up afterwards in a Bible, go and look up Mark chapter 5. So the area is blood-soaked from Ptolemaic, Seleucid, Roman battles and uprising. My hypothesis is that these daimones, or unclean spirits, as we've spoken about previously, were actually soldiers who had suffered at the hands of occupying forces and were now causing distress to this poor demoniac. He was being possessed by unclean spirits. The text says, pneuma akathartos, not pneuma poneros. So he wasn't being possessed by non-human spirits predominantly, but by human spirits. Okay, they were not the evil spirits that were of the giants, the non-human ones. And remember, diamonds included spirits of the dead. A couple of sort of theologians, Bolt and Thiessen, both of those suggested that these are the dead possessing the man. So I'm not the first one to come up with this idea, but I'm happy enough to run with it and develop it further because I think it actually makes a lot more sense of some of the more puzzling aspects of this story. These are unclean because of where they're found. So he's living in tombs or memorial sepulchres, nema. You've got ritual unclean laws of the times, and they cause disease in people. So this man is unclean. He's possessed by unclean spirits. He is ipso facto not going to be able to go to the temple. And he's probably not even a Jew, actually. There's a bit of a link back to a chapter in Isaiah 65, which also talks about offering incense on bricks to demons which do not exist. So this is a bit of a polemic. And they live in tombs, spend nights in dark corners, eating the meat of pigs and using unclean food. This particular Isaiah, is having a go at the heathens for their demon worship, ancestral worship. So if they are spirits of dead soldiers that are buried in their tombs, are they now possessing the man? Well, they've got preternatural knowledge. They knew Jesus was approaching their territory, according to the text, and the man runs down wanting to meet him. So for those who are engaging with people who are exhibiting or potentially exhibiting possession type stuff, one of the things that goes into the training is that they'll know you're coming. And it would have been dark upon arrival as well. So he sets off from the sea in the evening. There's a big storm that brews up and it'll be quite dark. And he recognizes Jesus as Son of the Most High, which is a Gentile term. It's not Son of God, which is a Jewish term. So we're talking about somebody who isn't a Jew and beings that are not Jews that are possessing this man. Have you come to torment us before the appointed time? They say to him. So there's this idea that they know that they're going to face torment. And interestingly, do not send us back to the abyss. Now, the abyss was a realm of the dead. So these look like spirits that have come from the land of no return, from the abyss, from Sheol, from Hades, for some reason, and they they don't want to go back. So if they are spirits of dead soldiers buried in the tombs, the language used would be appropriate. Now, when you look at the language, it uses the term legion. It's the only Latin word in the New Testament. The Aramaic is legio, both of which by that time didn't actually mean to the average person a massive Roman group of soldiers, but just meant myriad, lots. Okay, so it's not necessarily a military term at that stage, but it is a military term that has links with, say, the 10th Legion, which is stationed at Gadara around about that time. The spirits beg to enter, or band of pigs. Okay, they want to enter a band of pigs. This is another military term at the time. And Jesus dismisses, so he uses this epitrepsin word, which is a word that was used to dismiss soldiers. So it's another military term. And the pigs rush, hormeo, into the sea. Now, if you ask a pig farmer, how do pigs operate when they're scared? They scatter in all directions. They're not like sheep or cattle or horses that will all charge in one go. No, pigs just run everywhere. So the whole idea that these pigs rush into the sea kind of has links with a Roman or a military battalion, as it were, rushing into battle. So the language there is very militaristic in this particular passage. Why? Well, maybe it's because they are spirits of dead soldiers. There was a lack of willingness to leave the area they've defended. Do not send us out of the area is one of the translations that one of the other parallel passages in the other synoptic gospels. And it might explain the destruction of the pigs. You see, I've always been fobbed off by church pastors and ministers and vicars with the teaching that, well, this was because Jesus was a Jew and pigs were unclean, so therefore Jesus didn't mind seeing 2,000 of these pigs run over the cliff and kill themselves into the sea. But that doesn't fit with the Jesus I know, who was actually the creator and lovingly created everything, and then says to Peter later on, when he sees a vision from the clouds coming down with all unclean animals on it, including pigs, there would have been. I don't think Jesus operates like that in the rest of the Gospels towards his creation. It's not on mass slaughter like that. And that's always puzzled me. It's been a bit of a fob off. However, if you understand this as the spirits of Legion are actually deceased humans that have been killed in battle with the occupying forces, which are Roman occupying forces, and you understand that the Roman soldiers, their staple diet was pork, that's why you've got so many pig herders on top of this region here, on top of the flat bit of region up here. And Gadara, where the Legion's based further on, these are basically the food powerhouse of the Roman forces in that region. If you're a spirit that has been killed by these, what a better two fingers to the Roman Empire to go and destroy their food source. And I think that's what's going on. There's basically, these spirits have got out and they've gone into the pigs and destroyed them. Now, whether or not Jesus knew that was going to happen, I don't think he necessarily did know that was going to happen, because it did make a rather dent in his ministry. He was actually hounded out of the area at the time. He does go back later, and there's the miracle of the feeding of the 4,000. But at that time, he was persona non grata in that area. They've got to explain to the Roman soldiers what the heck's happened to all the food. So I think that's what's actually happened there. And it neatly explains it, I think. And it has this human element to it as well, that when you're dead, you don't necessarily change your, you don't instantly change your personality. I think there would have still been some justice that would have been wanted to be meted out by those that have been killed. And they don't want to leave the area. They're passionate about the region that they've defended. So, Jesus is an exorcist. He doesn't seek to initiate the contact, it comes to him. He's discerning, he's attempting to exercise like before, but he finds resistance, and this is really interesting. Jesus could have gone, flip out you go, but they don't. So he's ended up having to engage in dialogue with them. And they attempt to bind him using his name, Son of the Most High. So there's this whole exorcism thing about if you know the name, you can bind. He resists that, and he gets their name out of them and uses it to bind them instead. So you have got some exorcistic practice going on by Jesus. He allows them to become in flesh once more. They can't be Jewish spirits, because no Jewish spirit would be seen dead in a pig. Pun intended. So the psychic disturbance you've got in these creatures causes them to be destroyed. This has implications if you're into deliverance ministry. When you send something out, beware, just make sure you know what you're doing. This is why I'm very much against everybody just doing deliverance ministry. I don't think it's something that everybody can do. I think it's a little bit dangerous, in fact, for just your average punter to go and do this. I think you do need some training, and things like the Vatican do exorcism training courses. The Anglican Church does as well. So, possession, implications for today. You have healing of person. You've got minor and major exorcisms that take place. Major is the heavy-duty stuff. You don't get pea soup and head spinning and all of that, and cooking socks in Hull. That sort of thing doesn't really happen. You do get, by the accounts, ancient languages being used. Preternatural knowledge is another thing. And I would ask materialists who say that possession is just purely mental instability, how do they get preternatural knowledge using a mental disease, illness? You've got minor possession as well, which is just a blessing over. So when you have a baptism, that is a minor exorcism that takes place there. You've got this practice called ghost laying. It's kind of gone out in the sort of 18th, 19th century. But your parish priest would be doing ghost laying, where he would be healing the unquite dead. You would have requiem masses, requiem Eucharists, to bring peace and healing and wholeness to those that had already passed over, that were in torment. This is going back to the early first century Christian practices of praying for the dead. But because of the Reformation, you won't find many Protestants doing this as a mainstream practice. You will find pioneers who will be doing it, but you won't be finding it as a mainstream practice. In fact, exorcism was pretty much outlawed by the Church of England up until recently. If you want to look up exorcism and the history of exorcism in the UK, and the Anglican Church and the Catholic Church, Francis Young is a brilliant author and scholar on that particular material. So I do recommend his books on exorcism in the Anglican Church and the Roman Catholic Church. Anybody who's watched one of these ghost hunting programs will notice that there's been a change in the last 10 years where it used to be ghosts and spirits of the dead. It's now demons. And there's this frenzy of demons. I don't think they know what they're talking about. And I don't think they know what they're dealing with. Even if there is a paranormal entity at work, I don't think to label it immediately as a demon, as a non-human spirit, is helpful. I think there's got to be discernment that goes on. But that doesn't make good telly. And you've got visions and dreams, time slips, out-of-body experiences. All of these are doorways of perception to other realms. If you've ever read any of Paulino's material on time slips, there's a place in Connecticut, the Village of Voices, I think it's called. That's its nickname anyway. But that seems to be where you've got alternative overlaid realities of existences going on that seem to permeate through. Places that are the Celtic thin places as well, where you can perceive into the other realms, are something that is common throughout many cultures across the world. So the spiritual reality, or the spiritual realm, has been accepted as a reality since the dawn of humans. It's only modern times, post-Enlightenment rationalism, that has tried to get rid of it, and its materialism. But it doesn't go away. In fact, interest in the paranormal is on the rise, and it has been for decades now, and it's accelerating. So what can we learn from the ancients that can help us recover a supernatural worldview that is coherent with the experiences that we have today? That's what I'm going to leave you with as a question. Because I don't think we should dismiss the ancients for what they had as just phooey, superstitious nonsense. I think, we were dealing with clever people here. We weren't dealing with idiots. And they had access to stuff, including some athenogenic stuff even, that was opening up doorways of perception. And I think we need to realise that we can learn a lot from them. What is it? If we don't learn from history, we repeat its mistakes. So what can we learn from the ancients? I would encourage people to go study Mesopotamian ghosts, Egyptian ghosts, Hebraic ghosts. You won't find a lot of material. I'm kind of having to scratch around here, but there is more coming online in the academic realm as people are able to discuss this stuff without being excommunicated from the church, shall we say. Okay, so that's basically it. Thank you very much for staying, and if you've got any questions, feel free.
Thank you very much, Matthew. And we're now going to go into the questions in a moment. I think Caroline normally does those. If we could start off by just thanking Matthew, everyone. I think we've still got a very large number of people here tonight. I don't know whether or not you want to record the questions as well.
Yeah, you can go for it.
Okay, well, if we start off by just, we'll close down the overhead, the PowerPoint, so we can see you again. And then we'll start off with, I'll ask the first question, as I always get the right to for wearing a silly hat, and then everyone else too. So thank you very much for an amazing talk. And while you were talking, I thought of Francis Young. This is his history of, if I can find it, I think the light's reflecting off it, isn't it?
Excellent book.
Anglican exorcism. He did one on Catholic as well. We're both from Bury St Edmunds, and I spend all my time winding him up. And he's got quite an amusing story of the night that we both almost started to believe in fairies after I saw a strange entity outside my house. So I started to message him, and there's this incredibly convoluted. Anyway, also Michael Heisler's book.
That is brilliant.
That's probably one of the better books I would think of, but even a conservative evangelical like me can enjoy that. And a slightly unusual way, but if you want to get your idea around those kind of the biblical worldview and the notion of a lozenge floating on the waters, don't forget the RuneQuest role-playing game, based on Greg Stafford's Glorantha, because all he did was he took his anthropology and mythology classes and he created a role-playing game setting that, unlike Dungeons and Dragons, which does in fact include Lamassu and other entities, it actually is built upon Bronze Age mythology. And so therefore it takes these issues very seriously. And while he was building his mythology, he used a lot of Canaanite mythology as a base for it. So, and the Storm Pantheon. So always remember that role-playing games are often a very good way, kids, to actually learn an awful lot of really interesting theology. Matthew, you reminded me at the beginning, you started off by saying that you were going to read the Bible like any other book, in the words of Benjamin Jowett, and essays and reviews on the interpretation of Scripture. Yes, I once read it. Yes, it's hundreds of pages long. And yes, it isn't really very controversial anymore. But he also says in that essay that we should see the Bible, we should read the Bible not just like any other book, but we should read it with a critical spirit or critical faculty, and attempt to see the world through the eyes of, actually, see if I can find the exact quote. I almost certainly can, because I keep, of course, you keep a copy of the 33rd Bampton Lecture, Lux Mundi, and essays and reviews on your phone, just in case you find yourself dealing with somebody from the CFPSS. So here we go.
Dear.
Search. The office of the interpreter is not to add another meaning, but to recover the original one, the meaning, that is, of the words as they first struck on the ears or flashed before the eyes of those who heard and read them. Now, that seems a very naive 19th century Protestant Tübingen school way of looking at the Bible, but who am I to judge? But yeah, so when you're talking about trying to regain the original meanings, do you think that's theologically important for the Christian faith? Because I mean, I regard it as an interesting question of hermeneutics and anthropology and writing interesting, well-detailed role-playing game settings. But I'm not sure it's necessary to salvation. It may, in fact, be a diaphora, a matter indifferent.
No, I don't think it's a salvific thing, what I'm doing here. I think all I'm trying to do is just provide a way of entering the text that makes other parts of it that are completely confusing and puzzling actually make sense. Because you've got to understand, the original text would have made sense to the original writers and hearers. They wrote it with a coherence. We have 2,000 years removed from that. And, you know, we've had interpretations and layers and layers and layers of interpretations and traditions and ideas come along. And you want to kind of peel that off and get back as close as you can to what they actually meant.
I'm not sure the Roman Catholics with their magisterium or the tradition of the church predating, after all, the development of canon would agree with you. I mean, the church is...
I don't care.
It's 4 centuries that we had Christianity before we had a agreed canon, is one of the problems. But yeah, I'm always careful about this question of whether we can put text as central or not. But before we get into major theological issues, let's go back. Are you saying that Frank Peretti lied to me, by the way? Not everybody should go around casting out demons and claiming, taking on the spiritual strongmen of areas.
Frank Peretti, blooming heck. Honestly, for those that don't know, Frank Peretti wrote a load of fiction about demons and human beings and has influenced a lot of evangelical culture, especially in America. You've got demons that are sitting, spinning their fingers inside people's heads to screw their thoughts up and all that sort of stuff. There is a word that I won't use, but it rhymes with scallops. So
You're
I'm
not
afraid
of Peretti's spiritual warfare, then?
I'm not a big fan of it. No, I think that we are small and crunchy, and you know, we can deal with low-level stuff, but I wouldn't want to come face to face with a god of a nation. Say, that ain't my job. You've got another set of beings that are there that are powerful enough to do that, in my understanding.
Yeah, potentates, dominions, powers of countries,
Principalities. Yeah.
You don't hear a lot about those nowadays. I mean, I know about them largely through writing role-playing game books, available from all good bookshops. But no, jokes aside, I mean, I do know about these terms. But
Michael Heiser's Unseen Realm is very good on that. It's an academic deep dive into this sort of material.
I couldn't believe he got to 29 without reading Psalm 82 and being shocked. But anyway, enough of that. He seems so slow in that respect. Is Dave Sivier here tonight, or has he had to head off?
He's
still
here.
here, yes.
David, would you like to take the first question tonight, so I stop making bad jokes?
Yeah, I'll do that, CJ.
Go for it.
Okay. I'm interested. I was interested in what you had to say about the Gadarene swine.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I've heard a very similar explanation about it, which said that the emblem of the particular legion in that area was a pig.
Yeah, that's often believed to be the emblem of the 10th Legion, Legio Fraternis. There is a problem with that, and I can give you the dates. This is part of my book. Oh, my computer's just decided to go with the Wheel of Death. Basically, the 10th Legion didn't have the boar as its emblem at the time of writing this particular text.
Right.
That emblem was used by the Ironclads, the 6th Legion, I think. They aren't in the area. So the whole concept of this being a polemic against the Roman Empire doesn't make any sense. And on my website, I go in a deep dive on why those that hold to this being an emblem of the 10th Legion, why they're wrong, basically, according to history. According to history.
Matthew,
Mm-hmm.
David, does that answer your question? Or
Yeah, that answers my question.
my question then to follow, because then we'll hand over to Caroline and things will get saner. In Mark's Gospel, deliverance is often associated with spittle and soil.
Mm-hmm.
Why? I've always wondered that. Jesus spits upon his hand and touches and then speaks in, and he doesn't use a magical language. He doesn't use Hebrew. He uses Aramaic, which again is unusual because I would have assumed that Hebrew would be a language of authority, just as Roman Catholic exorcists now use Latin.
Mm.
But he seems to speak in the vernacular. Now he's God, so he can do whatever he wants. But I just wondered what the significance of the spit is.
To be honest, I haven't looked it up. I'm going to be honest. I think when there's making mud, and I think the making of mud and putting on the eyes of the man that was born blind has links back to the making of man from the dust of the earth. And so I think the eyes, having not been created in the birth of the person, he's actually using that as a metaphor of recreation, finishing off the creation within that person so that they can actually see. But strangely, it doesn't work first time. He starts to, it doesn't, they see trees, so it's almost like blurry. And then he does it a second time and it works. So I think the human aspect of Jesus is coming through in that he's trying stuff out.
Okay. Last question, because I'm fascinated. Nephilim, have you ever heard references to them having teeth of brass?
No.
Right, okay, because that's an interesting one that I saw. Crowley or someone references it when he's talking about the Nephilim. And I just wondered if there was actually a Gnostic or a apocryphal source for it, because I mean, it's certainly not mentioned by any of the Apocrypha I've read.
It's not in the Apocrypha. It's not in any of the pseudepigrapha I've read, and 1 Enoch is the big go-to for the Nephilim.
Yeah.
So
Absolutely.
I think that might be some medieval rabbi stuff that's come along.
Sure. So for those who've arrived late, the Nephilim in question are the sons and daughters of those who bred with the sons and daughters of God, or the offspring thereof, the Watchers, aren't they? They are not the Carl McCoy 1980s goth band that I once went to see.
They don't have fields of their own, no.
No fields available this week or allotments. Caroline, would you like to be sensible and take over hosting duties?
Well, unfortunately, my first question's not sensible, but thank you very much, Matt, for a wonderful talk again.
Welcome.
Can I just say your quote, cooking socks in Hull, that's got to be the quote of the year. Thank you for that. It's made my day.
Okay.
Brilliant. Before I start asking questions, Alan, my lovely, You've had your hand up for ages. Did you want to unmute and ask a question to Matt?
Oh, you've muted
Right.
again, Alan.
Thank you very much, Matt.
You're welcome.
Very interesting analysis of the story of the pigs. I wondered if you were aware of an earlier analysis of it, which was by Leslie D. Weatherhead during the 1960s in his book Religion, Psychology and Healing.
I've got his book, Wounded Spirits, here.
Well, he wrote one, Religion, Psychology and Healing, which was primarily about trying to look at the New Testament healing miracles in light of the modern sort of discoveries of psychology of the previous 80 years. And he went to the site himself in the early 1930s and writes about it. And his suggestion was, in fact, that the possessed man who could break chains was, in fact, a victim of abuse by physical Roman legionaries, basically been tortured, and he was traumatized, and this explains the reference to the Legion. Effectively, they turned his brain. He was a victim of post-traumatic stress syndrome. I have to say, however, if we look at a paranormal explanation into it, then yours does really seem to fit the text quite well. It's an interesting thing that when the Church of England did move back into exorcism, and the first sort of modern study is a work that comes out in 1972.
The Exeter Report.
The Exeter Report, yeah, which has been about 10 years in the making. One of the references in the report, or one of the statements, is that you should not perform exorcisms or ceremonies with an animal on the premises. And if we think more widely, of course, animals do react very strongly to certain types of psychic phenomena, particularly mammals, horses, dogs, cats, react to hauntings, haunted sites, and so on. And even there's even a whole study done by Gordon Crichton, who eventually came to the view that UFOs were perhaps manifestations of something demonic. He did a very lengthy series of articles many years ago on animal reactions to alleged flying saucer appearances. On the point that Jesus wouldn't have done this to creation, though, another problematic story in the New Testament, of course, is Jesus's cursing of the fig
tree. Yeah.
And so the power to curse also runs equally through, including in other parts of the New Testament, the fate of Ananias and his wife in Acts for stealing the
money.
The money,
Yep.
and so on. So there is this definite sort of trend, equally, of punitive type of miracles. Certainly, the other thing I've been, there's very interesting, great amount to talk about here in this. I would echo what you say, particularly about the question of amateur exorcism. And this ties up with an interest of mine, my own background as a lawyer. I've been compiling for quite a while now a collection of modern cases where possession or claims of demonic possession or devils or spirits or supernatural influences arises in modern criminal cases. And the two things that stand out is that although you can't, I mean, we more or less gave up on spectral evidence in the 17th century at the end of the witch trials, thankfully. But there is no doubt there has been a rise in this type of case, and quite serious cases. It is a background to homicide cases, which are quite often not who done it, but why done it. And there are a growing number of cases which are reaching the Court of Appeal, where the actual dispute is what is the psychiatric illness or disease of the mind or impairment that this individual who claims that they heard the voice of the devil or they are possessed or they're whatever, that is posing a real problem at Court of Appeal level, because what happens is the psychiatrists are split. They can't actually determine which way it is, and there's an appeal as a result over some interpretation. So modern materialistic medicine is far from certain about these states. At the same time, however, I think it's equally dangerous. This is particularly makes, I think, your warning particularly cogent, to rush into immediately ascribing everything to discarnate activity, spirit influence, the devil, or whatever, until you get a kind of devils in the jam jar universe, where they're popping up.
Devil of the gaps.
Yeah, because you get two counter situations to that. You get some individuals who are, and this is what actually led the Church of England to be a lot more careful, was the 1975 horrendous murder case in Ossett, Yorkshire, where a man underwent an exorcism, then went home and killed his wife in a particularly horrendous fashion, and was sent to a psychiatric hospital for life. He was actually released after 3 years, in fact. But he was found clearly not guilty by reason of insanity. But within 3 years, he was sane again. And that was the case that made the Church of England a lot more careful. But equally, there's a number of cases which end up with homicide convictions, either murder or manslaughter, where the people actually on trial are the exorcists for what they have done to the victim.
Yeah.
So whether one takes a purely psychological and psychiatric approach to this, or whether you possibly open the door to something else being involved, and I think it's a question you've got to be very careful about answering, because strangely enough, everybody knows the answer. Deep down, they have discussions like this polarize people into people who believe and people who reject it, and it's very hard to actually get a middle ground on this.
Well, I'm a scientist, so my approach is find the normal in the paranormal, and that's the approach that the Church of England takes. Basically, is the knocking on the wall animals? Is it air in pipes? That sort of thing. Even things like, are there EMF fields from lights that are causing issues with the brain? That sort of, trying to find the scientific explanation. What I would call the Sherlock Holmes approach. You eliminate the impossible, eliminate the possible, until whatever you're left over with, however impossible, is possible, is the answer. Regarding Leslie Weatherhead's analysis and putting it down to pure psychology, definitely there's some psychology that's going on in here. But then I would say that if you've got more than one spirit in one body, you're going to have a clash of sort of control that's going to take place. You have possession syndrome, which is a psychological thing that is written about these days. I would say that a mental illness isn't going to cause 2,000 pigs to charge over a cliff. So I would disagree with Weatherhead on that one because of that particular instance. I've never known that. I will look up the Exeter report and the animal stuff, because that is really interesting and would make a lot of sense with things like Rupert Sheldrake's material as well on animals and sensing and having some psychic abilities. If you actually look in the Bible, you've got a donkey that can see an angel, for instance. So there is that sort of idea that other parts of creation can access spirit realms that we can't. And as you say, evidence suggests that animals are more easily influenced. So yeah, that would make... I'm going to have to read that one up. In terms of the legal aspect, the diocese that I'm currently in, which is Nottingham and Southwell, are actually doing a lot of legal work because they're quite frightened by this sort of stuff. And the legal aspects of safeguarding when you're doing a deliverance are taken very, very seriously. And there is the issue of vicarious liability which means that if your church folk go off on their own and decide, oh, we can do this, and try an exorcism on somebody, and it ends badly, the actual church minister themselves is legally responsible vicariously. It's not actually happened as a test case, but it is a concern within the Church of England. It's not a concern within your general charismatic Pentecostal sort of like put them on stage and have them on as a production line type exorcism. But I think with that, what's going on is that's more a replacement for confession, where they're just confessing and naming a spirit, which is actually what they believe is the sin that they've been involved in, out loud, and then the exorcism is just the exoneration, the absolution. I think that's an analog that's going on there. But yeah, I definitely would not advocate that this is something that your typical punter should be touching. And those that are going around doing ghost hunts or ghost busting, as it were, I think there needs to be a level of discernment, because those that go into a place and go, oh yeah, you've got a demon, don't understand the psychological issues that's going to cause for the people that are in there, if it isn't a spirit being that's causing this, but it's just, say, air in the pipes, that sort of thing. You know, the old Ghost Watch with pipes and the kid that killed himself because of that. You know, these things can happen. They're a reality. So we have to be sensible rather than just sensationalist. And that's what worries me about a lot of these ghost hunting programs.
Thank you very much.
Alan, thank you very much. Matt, I'm conscious we've got quite a few comments and questions to get through. I'll see if I can whiz through them all quickly. Kieran Farrell said, indulgences were the thing that turned Martin Luther from a reformer into a revolutionary.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah. And indulgences, for those that don't know, were you could buy your way out of purgatory, out of this idea that you didn't go immediately to heaven, you went to a place where you were tormented, and by paying money for these indulgences, you could, for your loved ones, you could get out of jail earlier, as it were. I think he threw a lot of baby out with the bathwater there. The idea being that I think 2 Maccabees 12 is the standard text for, or 2 Maccabees 48, I can't remember which. I think it's 12. Was talking about prayers for the dead. So that's actually in the Septuagint translation of the Bible, the apocryphal section, the Deuterocanonicals. Luther didn't want anything to do with the dead being conscious and aware of what's going on. So Luther and the Anabaptists created this thing called soul sleep, where you just basically die and you have no awareness until the resurrection. It got to the point where it was so silly, even Calvin, who was another reformer, wrote a tract called Psychopanacea, which was against Luther and the Anabaptists' idea of soul sleep. So the reformers, even then, were up in arms against each other because of the way that they were looking at the afterlife or trying to remove it.
Thank you. Moving down to Robert, our vice chair, he said the Good News Bible uses the term mob rather than legion in his version of Luke 5.
Okay. The Good News isn't a translation so much as a paraphrase, so it's not actually going down to the original language. It's trying to bring it into a modern way of doing things. I'm trying to do the reverse and go back down to the original language. So legio is in the Greek, therefore I would go with legion. But I do understand the Good News is trying to say a mob, a myriad. You could have in other translations, that sort of thing.
Kieran again says, thank you for an informative talk. I'd like to ask about the attitude to talking or communicating with ghosts, souls, spirits. Should one engage with them, as later the church stood against this? Were there equivalent of psychics and mediums? And if so, were they respected or not in early biblical times?
So psychics, as we understand them today, didn't exist back then. You had people who had psychical gifts. They were called prophets, healers, that sort of thing. they weren't looked down upon. What you did have prohibitions against were people who were being possessed by an ancestral spirit and using that as an intermediary to go into Sheol to bring up the spirit that you wanted. It could be either possession into you, or it could be, as Finkel describes in the Mesopotamian text, it goes into a skull. So you'd have the skull of the being that you wanted to create. The spirit that you had, a familial spirit, would go into the skull, bring up from Sheol the spirit that you wanted to commune with, and the skull would talk, as it were. The Yidoni, the fortune-telling ghosts, similar to the Pythonic ghost in Spirit in Acts, fortune-telling type stuff. Again, it's all about where you seek your information from. In the Bible, the Israelites are taught to seek only information from Yahweh. When you get to Jesus, Jesus is actually testing these spirits. He's actually conversing with demons, the spirits of the dead. So he is using discernment, and later on in the text, 1 John chapter 4 talks about testing the spirits. So whilst I wouldn't necessarily advocate initiating contact, I would say that if contact comes from the other side, then you listen and you discern what's going on there, rather than just accept everything, because you wouldn't just open the door to any stranger coming in and allow them into your house. And I think people are too gullible, and if they are in contact with stuff that is able to come through, they let it through without too much discernment, I think, because of the willingness to contact the other side overrides that discernment process. I've known priests that go into houses and stuff and do house cleansings that will converse and see spirits appear while they do Requiem Eucharists, for instance. There is a bishop that is on record as having seen someone appear when he did a Eucharistic Requiem Eucharist. So, yeah, I wouldn't necessarily just go out and say, come on, show us, talk to us, as you do see on these programs, because I think it's treating the dead as an entertainment gimmick, which I think is highly disrespectful, for one thing. But I also wouldn't want to seek information from them about my own future, because I think that's just like the embodied can lie to us, so can the disembodied.
Thank you. Mike Mason says, Rune Quest Big Book of Cults and Gods is coming soon.
Okay. I would counter that with, well, not counter it, I would append that with the dictionary of deities and demons in the Bible. If you want one book on this subject that is an academic level, it's about that thick, nearly 1,000 pages of good academic texts, go for that one. Deities, the Dictionary of Deities and Demons in the Bible, otherwise known as the DDD.
Thank you. Another book, Cal Cooper says, Pastoral Practice and the Paranormal by Bonaventure Kloppenberg.
Okay.
I hope I said it right.
Pastoral
Practice,
yeah,
and the Paranormal,
okay,
by Bonaventure, all in one word.
Yeah.
Kloppenberg, Kloppen Berg.
Right. I'll see if that's in the CFPSS library.
What do you think of Canon Michael Perry's stuff?
I like his stuff, actually. I think he says a lot of sensible things. I know I've got friends who have issue with the way he portrays the occult. They are Christian occultists, and they have issues with Perry on his sort of generic broad brush stroke with the occult. But apart from that, I think he actually has a lot of sensible stuff. He wrote the textbook called Deliverance, which is the Anglican text for deliverance ministry. And he used to be my predecessor 2 editors ago for the Christian Parapsychologist Journal. So, yeah, top bloke.
Ed Wood said, as soon as the coin in the coffer rings, the soul from purgatory springs.
Yeah, that was a preaching point for, I can't remember the name of the guy that came up with it, but yeah, that was used as a get Brexit done type slogan to drum up support.
Kieran's also said, I went through some deliverance ministry rituals and the question of the animals did come up. I was the same bishop on both occasions a number of years apart. Interestingly, he asked me the second time if he'd resolved the problems. I obviously said that the previous rituals had not worked, otherwise he would not have had to come back a second time.
I think trying to clean stains out of a carpet takes more than one go. I think it's the same necessarily with a house cleansing as well, or a healing of a person. We've got this idea that exorcism is wham bam, thank you man, next one on please. It can take a year or more to get complete healing of mind, body and spirit.
In the questions, it actually says, Cal Cooper says, question, hand up. Is that you wanting to ask a question, Cal? There is a little icon at the bottom you could push.
Not on
He's
mine.
yawning.
I've just gone through the web browser, so I haven't got that. I'm doing it old school. I'm steam powered.
Okay, go ahead.
It was a series of statements, really, more than anything. Obviously, I subscribe to the Christian parapsychologist, as Matt knows. He only lives around the corner from me, so we've had a few meetups, and I've gone through a lot of the Christian parapsychologists and what they've done over time. But for my link, when I was doing my first PhD, I was looking at hope through people having after-death communications, and realised that there was a lot of overlap between the resurrection of Christ and how that symbolically relates really well to how people perceive and then interpret over time their own individual after-death communication experience. So I wanted to kind of, this is a series of statements more than a question, really, some notes you can comment on, but that's one way in which parapsychology has had a nice overlap with religion. The fact that right now, after-death communications are a primary research target because we're looking at the clinical benefits of having them and any survival elements that they may contain. We had the big Bigelow essay last year, and there were loads of these instances highlighted and referenced. People like James Hislop wrote books like Psychical Phenomena and The Resurrection. There's a few with more or less the same title like that from big players in psychical research of years gone by. And Joseph Banks Ryan, he went full circle. So initially he wanted to be a minister. His family were interested in him going down that route. He turned to science, he got into botany. His wife, Louisa, she completed her PhD in botany. Then a couple of years later, he completed his at the University of Chicago. He founded the Parapsychology Lab at Duke University, methodological testing of ESP, didn't want anything more to do with mediumship and field investigations. Many years go by establishing all of that, and then towards the very end of his life starts to get interest in people making individual claims of their abilities, like those that you've mentioned that we might pick out of the Bible, people having healing ability and many other things, and also questions of survival. And in the last year or so of his life, after he'd had a couple of strokes and he was practically blind, he was asked to be the president of the Society of Psychical Research in the UK, British side, not the American side. And he said, yes, he'd be delighted to. It kind of perked his motivation. And then his last thing that he was writing, which was going to be his presidential address, was on parapsychology and religion, its partnership and overlaps. And he never got to complete that, but Louisa Ryan took it over. So I just wanted to highlight that if you've got any comments, and also for other people of interest, that there are so many overlaps that even just within parapsychology as the mainstream discipline itself, aside from the Christian Fellowship, and there's been so many highlighted overlaps. Even the Parapsychology Foundation having a few international conferences that have shown overlaps as well. And they're there, and there are many uses between theological studies and the social sciences.
I think, correct me if I'm wrong, parapsychology was originally an attempt by certain Christians to try and bring psychology and the Bible together and to produce a scientific understanding of it. Am I correct in that, or is that just something that's got garbled over COVID.
Potentially, because you've got two overlaps. If you want to stick to the title of parapsychology, then I'd have to turn to the German literature, which I'm not overly familiar with, but the title was adopted from Germany. Whereas we have psychical research that has come about because of the rise of spiritualism and the spiritualist movement and its overlaps with religion. And then the scholars at Trinity College, Cambridge, founding the Society for Psychical Research in 1882. So there you've got early physicists and psychologists coming together and saying, well, people are having these experiences, overlaps to religion and belief systems, but what are the truth claims behind the experiences report?
Yeah.
Two branches.
Cal's completely right to distinguish between psychical research and parapsychology. Parapsychology from Tishner et al. Comes out of Wilhelm Wundt's experimental positivist, very much numbers driven, quantitative psychical research. So it's a very experimental positivist kind of attempt to understand. But there was a lot of writing from both some of the spiritualists and people like Barrett who were very interested in trying to repudiate what they saw as being a growing materialism. Remember my joke at the beginning about Matthew Arnold and Dover Beach and the Sea of Faith with its melancholy long withdrawing roar that he writes about. So there's a definite beautiful key. Sorry, that was to Kel. There's a definite emphasis on psychical research, and it's definitely true for Podmore, and it's not Podmore, Sidgwick to a certain extent, because he is an agnostic and he wants a kind of scientifically established faith. But it's mainly true for, what's he called, womanizer from Cheltenham, not me, Frederick Myers. F.W. Myers, he was very, very much interested in the idea of proving scientifically the immortality of the soul. Also true of, forgotten the name of the fellow, how can I, because it's so hot, Edmund Gurney. Gurney was also very much involved in notions of attempting, and in fact he talks about it in Tertium Quid, which is his immensely tedious book in 2 volumes, which I encourage you never to read. And finally, there's J.B. Rhine himself, who had a strong desire to evince proof of Christianity. And many of the Rhine circle were actually also quite fervently anti-communist. I don't think they were ravingly right-wing. I don't think they were Reds under the bets. But they wanted to see an end to materialist communist dialecticism. They wanted to see something other than positivism. They wanted to bring moral and spiritual values and faith, and especially the Christian faith, back in. So I'm quite surprised at how many times that notion's come up. So what you're saying is completely true.
You've even got Walter Franklin Prince. I believe he was a minister and a scientist as well, and he was the one of the main founders and the first president of the Boston Society for Psychic Research, when the American Society for Psychical Research made a more or less a 50-50 split because the Mina Crandon controversy, and so that they moved over and had the Boston Society for Psychic Research. But he was their figurehead.
Even the post 27 to 30, was it 39 period? It's roughly that period when they split the two between the BSPR and the ASPR, and I really want to do YMCA now, but I can't. Actually, my article on the BSPR got deleted as being of insufficient interest by Wikipedia, something which I'm still annoyed about. So there you go. But yeah, the BSPR
deleted. So
yeah, Franklin Prince was definitely right. You're definitely correct to stress him as another champion of religious faith. But any kind of attack on a materialist, one world, positivist, easily explicable by physics, mundane worldview has always ended up being attracted into our field. Yet, as I discovered when I talked about my Christian faith, most parapsychologists don't have much time for religion, do they, Kel? They're more esoteric.
I think, I mean, it depends what university you're at. I mean, certainly we're very much interested at the University of Northampton because we also support transpersonal psychology within our research group. So we're interested in religious and peak experiences. One of our colleagues, Reverend Dr. Alistair Gordon Finlayson, he's a Zen Buddhist monk. And we've got a variety of religious representations amongst our research group. So we've got a few PhD projects that overlap to different religions. Some universities, though, are kind of very hardcore, let's test this claim of ESP. And so where religion really comes into that is no more than looking at a few belief scales of the participants you bring in. rather than looking deeply into the literature on religion or anything like that. So it depends where you are, who the researcher is, what their interests are, what you're trying to test. But it's got its place, as Matt has clearly kind of demonstrated from his presentation. It's got its place. And then, as I was mentioning with my kind of points to throw in, it's cropped up so many times in history that all these big figures have also said, look at the overlaps where you can actually discover new data or discover new meaning by actually looking at some of these representations, cultural understandings, and how people see the world.
And look at the CFPSS, which has been going for what, 60 years? How long has it been, Matthew?
It's 70 years next year,
And which
platinum anniversary.
always been a vibrant part, yet always held itself clear from the mainstream of, shall we say, sort of SPR-centered psychical research. Is that fair?
Yeah, I mean, we've got quite a few members who are SPR members as well, so there is an overlap there as well.
Yeah.
I ought to get mine back into sorted out. Sorry, Cal, I've got to get sorted. But yeah, we have, I think, we've got one patron, which is Rupert Sheldrake, but we've also got another patron of Rowan Williams. So we're not some fringe nutty group that certain three-letter sort of parts of the church would sort of try and push away and ignore. We are still going, and we are growing.
3-letter parts.
I can't mention those 3 letters.
You'll have to look message.
Not on record.
Okay, cool, of course. Yeah, no problem. Thank you very much.
We just got one last question, and she's been waiting patiently all evening, from C. Robbins. How do you understand the dead walking from their graves at the crucifixion in Matthew?
Oh yeah, the darkening of the skies and
the tombs breaking open and the dead going into Jerusalem. It's freaking weird, isn't it? It's one of those ones that when I get the time to, I'm going to really go down and have a look at, see what's going on there. I just think it's one of those wonderfully strange stories that I don't know the answer to yet. And I think it's been one that's been 2,000 years of chewing and head scratching, and I don't think we're talking zombies. But I think something happened that was different, and what that was, I would have to do more research on to find out.
Don't forget, Matthew, this is the culmination of human history. It's the supernatural eruption of God into mundane history. It's an entity from outside of time and space sacrificing himself to appease himself, as somebody once said. It's just an incredibly dubious way of putting it, but yeah,
that's one view of the atonement. There are others, like
one that I think
Victor.
we should possibly teach outside of
Bible college.
Outside of Bible college, but all of these, I mean, whether you go for ransom or whatever form of soteriology or whatever they call it these days, whatever the cool kids are using, whatever the explanation, when you've got a miracle at this level, when you've got God intervening in human history, when you've got humans able to survive bodily death and a new heaven and a new earth being promised in the future, and individual post-mortem survival for those who claim it, does the dead rising really seem that big a miracle? It seems quite mundane in comparison.
No, I mean, you've got Lazarus being raised from the dead, you've got Elijah raising the widow's son, you've got all sorts of raising from the dead on a minor scale happening. According to the texts. So, I mean, as you say, this thing was a big event. The whole darkness of 3 hours.
The rending of the temple wall, the earthquakes. Are they simply to answer Old Testament prophecies, typologies? Are they just the culmination of prophecy, or are they actually literal events? I don't know.
I think, I mean, I have my own idea on the darkness being the darkness that comes along with evil, and the fact that at the crucifixion, what happened was you had the gods of the nations descending upon Jerusalem and kicking 7 shades out of Christ on the cross, as part of the process of the worst of creation, venting its spleen to the Creator, and then the final victory afterwards, the keys of death and Hades, as Christ goes down into Hades and whips the keys of death and Hades away from them, takes the power away, opens the gates, takes the captives free. But that's another lecture.
The harrowing of hell.
The harrowing of hell.
Come
Hades,
back this time
Hades,
next year
not
for
hell.
the harrowing of hell with Matthew Arnold. Actually, that maybe should be rephrased slightly. Not the harrowing of hell by Matthew Arnold.
No, I didn't do it.
No, it
Not
wasn't his
guilty.
fault. Not guilty. Okay, you'll need a good solicitor. You'll need Ellen for that one. Okay, so we'll book you in again if that's all right to come back.
Yeah, if you want to, yeah.
So thank you very much indeed. Fantastic talk. I think the fact that after 2 hours and 10 minutes, miraculously, we've still got half of our people or more here, and you maintained a really high number all the way through to the end of your talk. And so thank you very much indeed. It's been a fascinating talk. Thank you to Mr. Kel Cooper, who hopefully will make an appearance at the convention in some form or conference this year. Are you talking, Matthew? I can't remember.
I'm not talking, but I will be appearing. I'm coming down.
Oh, fantastic. Well, you'll probably find out that I like to make bad jokes about religion if you hadn't gathered that by now.
I've got a thick skin. I'm not religious.
Oh, I am. I'm not spiritual. Definitely not.
I go the other way round.
No, not spiritual. Firmly
Once bitten, twice shy.
Where's the fun in it if you can't condemn others, hey?
How do people subscribe to the Christian Parapsychologist if they want to read that or any new?
Okay. Go to churchesfellowship.co.uk and just find Christian Parapsychologist as one of the bits in the shop, and you can subscribe that way. My wife is the general secretary. We do a good double act. It just so happened I came as part of the baggage with her for the job. But yeah, so churchesfellowship.co.uk is the CFPSS website, and you can subscribe to the journal from there, or even become a member of the CFPSS.
Now, this is a guy who was really controversial in his day, Matthew Fox. What are your feelings about Fox? I'm trying to wave a copy of Original Blessings at you, but I don't know.
Original Blessings. Great idea. I mean, I subscribe to the Eastern Orthodox.
I'm really sorry to interrupt, but we've got a special joining offer, £5 for the first year.
Oh,
did you hear that?
I'm already a member, but
I'm typing.
Come on, guys.
Telling me.
She's just been listening in. How dare she?
Tell Chloe to come and say hi. We need her to talk for us as well. She still hasn't, and it's been 2 years.
Yeah. Well, there you go. You heard it. £5 for the first year to be a member of the CFPSS, and that gives you access. You get a copy of the journal twice a year, and the Fellowship Review, which is kind of like the magazine level. That's twice a year as well. And you get access to the library of really interesting books on this particular topic that is well over 1,000 titles, if not 2,000 or 3,000 as well. So there you go.
Come on, people, that's the same price as 2 pints of real ale from Wetherspoons.
Or a year's worth of ASSAP lectures, yeah.
A year's worth of ASSAP lectures as well. Oh, competition.
Well,
no.
For a £5, that's what you can get.
Hand in hand.
£5 is the going rate. Please note SPR. Please note Parapsychological Association. The CFPS and ASSAP can do it for a £5. Matthew, thank you so much. We'd love to book Jo to come and talk to us as well about the CFPS, if that's okay.
Yeah, I'll have a word with her.
Yeah, see if you can get her. I know she's busy on a Thursday evening with your WhatsApp talk. Is that still on Thursdays? That is Thursdays.
Yeah, she does that. I think it's, yeah, so the CFPSS has a WhatsApp group, local groups as well that are meeting up. I'm starting one in the Midlands area, I think from September onwards. And yeah, I'm going to hopefully do a tour of talks. So if you know a friendly location in your vicinity, then
can you do Nottingham?
I'm happy to come and talk. I'm based in Mansfield Woodhouse, in just north of Nottingham.
We've now got quite a few people who are interested in the Nottingham group. We're going to have a local meetup in Nottingham once a month.
Oh,
the really great bit is that I won't be there, so you should all come along and support it. And we're going to try and send a speaker along to do a short talk every month if we can, and also farm out cases to people from Nottingham via that method and
Mhm.
cooperate with other groups.
Sounds
So
good.
if you're up for that, let me know and I'll send you the details. Brilliant. Well, thank you very much indeed. Caroline.
Just to let you know, anyone
Sorry?
left
Anybody
here,
who wants to join, I'm going to put a coupon on to use the code ASSAP and you'll go to my
Oh, there you go. Use the coupon code ASSAP and you'll get the £5 joining.
But you're going to need to give me 20 minutes to put it online.
Oh, yeah, give her 20 minutes.
right, hang on, let me check that then. So use
This is on the fly stuff. I love it.
ASSAP.
Let's check if I'm still a member, because if my membership's lapsed, I'll rejoin. No,
I think your membership has relapsed. I'm not sure, CJ. Have a look.
I'll just rejoin anyway at the full price. It's worth it.
So I've
You
typed all that into the notes there, so that will be there when the recording comes out on
2 conferences a year you do, don't you? Spring conference and autumn conference.
Yeah, the spring conference is an online one.
Yeah.
The autumn conference it's going to be in Stone this year. So
Where's that?
Wasn't it in Brighton most years?
It's been in Brighton for quite a long time. Then it came to the Hayes Conference Centre in Derbyshire last year, and it's going to Stone this year.
Where's
Or this
Stone?
coming year, so next year, 2023. No, what am I talking about? Oh, COVID. It's just wiped my mind of dates. Yeah, this September is the CFPSS conference. Yeah.
Where is Stone?
In Stone is in Staffordshire.
Ah, okay, cool.
Yeah, just north, I think, of Stafford, or southwest of Stafford, or south.
Send us the details and I'll put it out in the news. If you send me the details of your meetings and anything you want me to put in the newsletter, I'll send it out to all our members.
Okay, thank you.
And the same applies to your researchers, Kel, if you've got any calls for experiments, etc. Because I'm constantly emailing people and bothering them with emails, so you may as well get the advantage of it. And the same to Alan, if there's anything you'd like to pass over to me, just email me directly and I'll put it in each newsletter. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much for having me.